Welcome back. It is August now, so that means it is time for our July wrap up. In the month of July, I read 7 books, and that was 3,554 pages. My average rating was 4.25, so I had an amazing reading month rating wise. I read just like so many good books. Like, I really didn't hate anything that I read this month, which is always a great feeling. Of my 7 books, 3 were romance, 1 was sci-fi, 1 was thriller, and 1 was fantasy. So let's get right into it. Oh, I also did DNF 1 book, and it was a romance book, and we'll talk about that in a second. The first 3 books that I'm going to be talking about you can find in my realistic reading vlog, but the first one was Poison Study by Maria V. Snyder. I borrowed this book from the library, so I no longer have the physical copy, but I believe it is on Kindle Unlimited now. This is a young adult fantasy with a little bit of romance in it. I absolutely loved it. I finished it in a day. Started, finished in a day. It was so good. I was hooked. I gave it 4 stars. So basically, this girl is in prison. That's where you start, Yelena, and she gets called up to whoever, some guy that's in charge, and he's like, hey, so we're gonna execute you because you murdered someone. And she's like, fair. And he says, well, instead of murdering you, or instead of executing you, we're going to make you the official food taster for the commander, which was like the king. So she is able to live, but now her life is in danger like every day because she's having to taste for poison in the commander's food and everything. So you're following her journey through this. She gets thrown into all of this political intrigue. There's magic, there's everything. It's a lot, and it's really good. The world building in this book was done very, very well. I think for someone who is maybe not sure if they want to try fantasy, especially like who prefers to read young adults, like I would definitely recommend this book as like kind of an entry into fantasy. And the magic system is explained in a super straightforward way. It's really easy to follow along with. It's not super duper prevalent in this book, but it will be so further on in the series. This is the first of a kind of long series. I think there's like 3 sets of trilogies. I don't know. There is a little bit of a romantic subplot, so if you are someone who really prefers like romanticies, this probably won't like do it for you, but I thought it was done very tastefully in terms of just how much of the romance plot was there. I was really happy with the balance. Content warning for this book is sexual assault. It is talked about pretty heavily a few times in the book, so just be aware of that. The next book I read was No Exit by Taylor Adams. Also got this book from the library. Most of the books that I read this month I got from the library, so I don't have the physical copies anymore. But this was a thriller, an adult thriller. I was looking for a different Taylor Adams book, but this was the only one that my library had, so I decided to get it, and I'm so glad I did. So this book is basically about these like 5 strangers that are all stranded at this abandoned, not abandoned, but just like it's the middle of a blizzard. And so they're at this rest stop with no cell service, no way to get out because of the blizzard, no way to contact anyone. They're just kind of stuck there until the storm passes. Well, then our main character, I don't even remember her name, but she finds a child in the back of a van. So she knows that someone at that rest stop is a kidnapper. And the entire book takes place in the span of, I think, 13 hours, something super short, like less than a day. So it is, the stakes are high. It's very, very fast paced, high tension. Like I was very stressed. It does, like I said, it takes place in a blizzard. I read this in Texas, July, out by my pool. So I was not very, like there was a little bit of a disconnect there between my surroundings and when I was reading, but I was still super immersed into it. Like the writing was very, very well, very, very good, to where I really did think like like I expected to be cold when I went outside because I was reading this book. I did find it a little bit gruesome at times because it is a thriller, so obviously like stuff happens. I would not classify it as horror, but just be aware there were some parts that made me a little sick to my stomach. So if you're very easily grossed out and queasy, maybe just skip this one. But honestly, you could probably just skim through it, which is what I did sometimes because it was gross. I gave this book 4 stars. I really, really liked it. It did everything it was supposed to do. The plot twists were really good. I didn't guess it like exactly, but I was hot on his trail, if you will. So I thought it was really, really good. This next book almost destroyed me. Oh my goodness. I read To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. I don't know why I read this. I don't know what possessed me to pick up this 800-page monster at the library. It was pretty and it looked interesting. Oh my gosh, I almost DNF'd it so many times. But I finished it. I read it. I did. And I ended up giving it 3 stars. The plot of this book is basically this woman is on a mission to like colonize other planets, like Earth is expanding into all the different systems and all that sort of science fiction stuff. She comes into contact with like an alien parasite basically, and boy howdy does it take off after that. Let me clarify. It doesn't take off in terms of like intrigue, but just from the start of the book to the end of the book, so much happens, which it better, it's 800 pages. But I just really did not know what to expect with that book. I mentioned in my vlog where I read this that I was looking for something that was giving Alien vibes because Alien Romulus comes out this month. I'm so excited. And it did, it served. It gave me Alien vibes because there were aliens. And there's just like a whole war between these alien species and humans, and she's dealing with this parasite and all of this stuff. That said, this is adult sci-fi, and it did not get interesting until about 300 pages in, at which point I finally was just able to like muscle through it. And the story itself was good. I did not like the writing style, and I didn't care about the characters until halfway through. And then once I did get that emotional connection, which was so hard for me to have that emotional connection with the characters because of the writing style, like it just wasn't written very well, I guess. And I'm not sure if that's just science fiction because this is only the second science fiction like book I've read, so maybe that's just the writing style of science fiction, but I was not super impressed with it. Overall though, it was good. Like I said, I gave it 3 stars. If you are into science fiction and you are okay with reading 800-page books and you don't mind a very, 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 very slow build up, then you'd probably like this book. But wow, I had to switch to the audiobook because I couldn't do it. It was taking me forever to read it. And every time that I sat down and opened it, all I could think of was how many other things I'd rather be doing than reading. But listening to it was a lot better because the narrator was pretty good. So that also I think helped with the emotional connection was when I switched over to the audiobook. So that's something. If you're going on a 33-hour road trip, you can just put this bad boy on, you know? While I was reading To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, I also started the audiobook Hello Stranger by Catherine Center. I say I started it because I did not finish it. Maybe if I had a physical copy and I was reading it, I could have made it through, but oh my gosh, that main character was so insufferable. She was absolutely so annoying. She was rude and judgmental, and I just could not get behind her. I was not rooting for her at all. I didn't care. And the whole thing with that is like she is a portrait artist who gets facial blindness. I made it that far and didn't care to continue because she explained what facial blindness was, I think, 18 times in the span of 2 chapters, and I just couldn't handle it anymore. I couldn't do it. And yeah, I just, like I said, I didn't like her, so I didn't want her to have a happy ending. She was so rude. Oh my gosh. So yeah, I didn't finish that one. Otherwise, my ratings for this month would have been a lot different. Props to you if you liked it. Not for me. Next was another audiobook. I was really feeling audiobooks this month, and I read or listened to Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey. This is a memoir that he did, and it was nothing like what I expected. It was short. It was only, I think, 7 hours. And if you really like Matthew McConaughey and his voice, then you'll probably like this. That's why I listened to it, because I like his voice. And someone had told me that his story was really good, but it's foul. Like, he uses some foul language, and he talks about some very wild, inappropriate things, which caught me very off guard. And it's frustrating because it was like half the time I was so into it, and it was like every time that I would stop listening to it, I would go and tell my husband everything that I heard. But then the other half of the time I was like, I can never repeat this to anyone. Like, it was just kind of shocking, everything I learned about this man. Good for him, you know? I still love watching his movies, and that's fine. I just really didn't know what I was getting myself into with this book, but it was entertaining. So I actually have the physical copy of the next book, and this is Summer Romance by Annabelle Monaghan. I loved this book. Oh my goodness, I loved it so much. It was such a quick read, and I just loved it. I loved it so much. I read it on my cruise, and I think I finished it in like 2 or 3 days, but I gave this like 4.5 stars-ish. It was so close to being 5 stars. But this is basically, it's about so much more than just a summer romance. But basically, it's this woman who's in the process of going through a divorce, and she's grieving her mom who died like 2 years ago, and she has 3 kids. So it's just a lot is going on. And this book, yes, the romance in it is like the main, or at least a main focus, but it also explores just dealing with grief and loss and depression and trying to find yourself after not knowing who you are for so long. And I'm not a mom, but I can definitely, like, I've heard so many times from so many different women how becoming a mom, it's really easy to lose who you are in your own sense of self, because you just become a wife and a mom and you kind of lose yourself. So that's definitely what happened to her, and this summer is spent finding out who she is, what she likes, dealing with the loss of her mom and her marriage, and then there's this new guy in the picture, and she's just overwhelmed and also trying to still be a good mom and be there for her kids. And it was so refreshing to read such a mature adult romance, because there wasn't all of the like silly little problems that I feel like are pretty common in younger romances. But it was so good. I really, really loved it. The only reason I didn't give it 5 stars is the end. There was like, I don't want to call it a third act breakup, but something near the end happens, and the way it's resolved, I was just like, that was unnecessary. Like, I get it, cool, whatever. And I'm not going to say what it is because I don't want to spoil it, but it was just like I didn't hate it, but it did knock it down like half a star. But highly, highly, highly recommend everybody read this book. It was so good. Another physical copy I have is Just for the Summer by Abby Jimenez. I started this while I was on my cruise, but I did not finish it until I got home. And wow. This is another adult romance. It is part of an interconnected standalone, the Part of Your World series, but I can tell you, you don't have to read the other two to read this one. I read Yours Truly, which is the second in this kind of series, but I didn't read the first one, and I think there are some characters in this one that were in Yours Truly, but there were definitely characters in this book that were in the first one that I haven't read, and I still very much enjoyed this book. So it's definitely not a requirement. I loved it. I absolutely loved it. 5 stars. It starts off so cute with like, there's a Reddit post, and that's how the two main characters meet. This is dual POV, so you get to see both sides of the romance basically and everything that's happening in their lives. Both of them have this like curse where every time that they date and break up with someone, the next person that their ex dates ends up being their soulmate. And so they meet each other and they come up with this idea of, oh, well, how about we date each other, then break up, then we'll both be destined to find our soulmates. But it is so much more than that. Oh my goodness. This book deals with childhood trauma and healing from it, and just going through crazy life events and stressors that you really can't prepare for, all while this really, really cute and sweet romance is happening. I don't want to say anything else to give it away. Please, please read it. Abby Jimenez did her research. I'll put it that way. She did her research. She knew how to write this character in a way that was realistic and genuine and flawed, and was able to make a beautiful story out of it. And I just read it. That's all I gotta say. The last book I read this month, which is crazy because I feel like I read a lot more than 7 books, but I'm in the middle of a bunch right now. But anyway, the last book that I finished in July was another library book, Lovely War by Julie Berry. This book, you guys, it is a young adult historical fiction romance, and it works. It is so unique because the narrators are actually Greek gods. But don't worry, you don't actually have to know any Greek mythology to understand or enjoy this book. Like, I am not huge into Greek mythology. Basically, they have their own like storyline happening, and they are recounting the story of these 2 young couples during World War I. So you have like these 2 different timelines and storylines happening, and I was really, really impressed with the writing style because it's told from the Greek gods' point of view. There's a lot of little asides of like the different gods recounting their involvement in these couples' stories, and they're each such a unique voice, and it sheds like, it's all from a different angle. So obviously you have Aphrodite, and she's the goddess of love and beauty, and so when she's telling the story, she's focusing on the romance of these young couples, versus you have Ares, who's the god of war, and when he's recounting the story, he's more interested in the World War I and what was happening like on the battlefield and at the front and all that stuff. So you just get all of these different perspectives on the story, and it really adds a lot to the story. The storyline of the 2 couples that's happening in World War I is beautiful. It is heartbreaking. It has stuck with me so much. It's so sweet. You have young love budding during a time so filled with sorrow and fear and war, and you have just like, the emotion is rich. It is so intense. You feel everything. Like, I was terrified that the man I love is on the front lines of the World War I, you know, like he's in the trenches. Just everything. It goes into racism and dealing with all of that at that time, but it still weaves in these beautiful nuances of loving music and wanting to create during a time of so much destruction. And wow, it was so good. Did I say 5 stars? It was 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I was so impressed by it. It was incredible. The only critique I have is not even on like the book itself, but there were typos in my copy, like several jarring typos, like using the wrong verb tense in a way that completely disrupted the flow of the sentence. Or there was one where it was giving a timeline of events and it's talking about August this, August this, August this, and then out of nowhere it says April and then goes back to August. Obviously that was supposed to say August, so I don't know how that didn't get caught. And just things like that where it definitely did take me out of the story because I was like, did that really just happen? But I was able to dive right back into it because, you know, it is what it is. But I absolutely loved it. Highly recommend. It was so sweet and pure and heartbreaking and tragic and beautiful. And I loved it so much. So please do yourself a favor and read it. That is all the books that I read in July. I think it's really fitting that I read 7 books in the 7th month. So I guess that means in August I need to read 8. Gotta keep up with the trend, you know what I'm saying? Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, don't forget to subscribe so that you can see all of the different books that I'm reading, hear my thoughts. I wanna hear your thoughts in the comments if you read any of these, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.